Hello, everybody, and welcome to another lesson in the book Prosperity, written by Charles Fillmore. I forget, what are we on? We're on lesson 8. I'm Reverend Wally White with Unity in Greensboro, and let my fellow minister introduce himself.
Hey, Wally, it's good to see you, and it's good to be with all of you that are joining us for Prosperity. I'm Reverend Todd Humphrey. I am the spiritual leader at Crystal Coast Unity in Atlantic Beach, North Carolina, and I am really getting a lot out of reading this book again. And so before we jump into lesson 8, I want to say thanks to Wally for coming up with this idea to read this together, discuss these ideas, and then share them with all of you. So thanks, Wally.
I'm so glad you said yes, and grateful that Christina said yes and joins us as often as she can as well.
Yeah.
And I think the lesson on this one starts, the conversation I think actually starts before we read a word on this one, because this one, the title is called God Will Pay Your Debts. And I think that many people, if not most, when they go into a study on prosperity, they're doing it because they feel like they've accumulated a certain amount of debt that they feel overwhelmed by, or they're looking for ways to relieve themselves of all that. I think debt plays a big part in why people go looking for prosperity, right? And so I guess the question that comes up for me that I thought was worth discussing before we even start reading is, why is it lesson 8 instead of lesson 1 if it's that? And for me, the answer to that is all this stuff that we've been talking about, of making it really clear what prosperity is, that it's not the material goods, that's the after effects, that's the really cool, wonderful after effects, but not the thing itself. But and like how it all flows through us, to us, that sort of thing. That if you jump straight into debt instead of really getting that understanding first, then all you really have a good shot of doing is creating more debt, because that's what you're giving attention to. So as we go into this, I think it's really important to stay clear and focused on the first 7 lessons that we've done before this one. And if we do that, I think that there's more power in these words than if we just go straight to, yeah, that sounds great, but I've got some debt I want to pay.
Well, I absolutely. And in this day and age, I think most of us do have a little bit of debt, maybe a lot of debt that we want to pay, but we have to do this work first about understanding how it is our consciousness and the thoughts that we carry around and place our emphasis on that are so important. And like you said, if we jump right into debt, then we're focusing on it and our debt's going to multiply. I don't want that for any of us.
You know, one of those cute little sayings I learned through the years in New Thought is, what you give your attention to will have its attention on you. And so it's like, you know, does that mean that you don't deal with negative stuff? No, there are plenty of negative things in our lives that it's upon us to do something about it. It's in our experience. But it's how we go about doing something about it is where, and that's where the attention lies in it, you know?
Absolutely.
Well, let's see that's what you and I have to say about it. Let's see what Charles has to say about it.
Let's see what Charles has to say.
All right. Lesson 8, God will pay your debts. Forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. In these words, Jesus expressed an infallible law of mind, the law that one idea must be dissolved before another can take its place. If you have in your mind any thought that someone has wronged you, that you cannot, in the cleansing power of spirit and the richness of spiritual substance, until you have cast out the thought of the wrong, have forgiven it fully. You may be wondering why you have failed to get spiritual illumination or to find the consciousness of spiritual substance. Perhaps the reason is here: a lack of room for the true thoughts, because other thoughts fill your mind. If you are not receiving the spiritual understanding you feel you should have, you should search your mind carefully for unforgiving thoughts. Thoughts are things, and occupy space in the mind realm. They have substance and form and may easily be taken as permanent by one not endowed with spiritual discernment. They bring forth fruit according to the seed planted in the mind, but they are not enduring unless founded in spirit. Thoughts are alive and are endowed by the thinker with a secondary thinking power. That is, the thought entity that the I am forms assumes an ego and begins to think on its own account. Thoughts also think, but only with the power you give to them. Tell me what kind of thoughts you are holding about yourself and your neighbors, and I can tell you just what you may expect in the way of health, finances, and harmony in your home. Are you suspicious of your neighbors? You cannot love and trust in God if you hate and distrust men. The two ideas, love and hate, or trust and mistrust, simply cannot both be present in your mind at one time. And when you are entertaining one, you may be sure the other is absent. Preach, Charles. Trust other people and use the power that you accumulate from that act to trust God. There is magic in it. It works wonders. Love and trust are dynamic, vital powers. You are accusing men of being thieves and fear that they are going to take away from you something that is your own. With such a thought generating fear and even terror in your mind and filling your consciousness with darkness where there's room for the Father's light of protection. Rather, build walls of love and substance around yourself. Send out swift, invisible messengers of love and trust for your protection. They are better guards than policemen and detectives. I'm going to read that again so that we can all try and do it all week long. Send out swift, invisible messengers of love and trust for your protection. Okay, jumping on to the next paragraph. Do not judge others as regards their guilt or innocence. Consider yourself and how you stand in the sight of the Father for having thoughts about another's guilt. Begin your reform with yourself. That means much of one who enjoys an understanding of mind and its laws, though it may mean little to the ordinary individual. He who knows himself superficially, just his external personality, thinks he has reformed when he has conformed to a moral and governmental laws. He may even be filled with his own self-righteousness and daily lift up his voice to praise God that he is not as other men are, that he has forgiven men their transgressions. He looks all men who do not conform to his ideas of morality and religion as being sinners and transgressors, and thanks God for his own insight and keenness. But he is not at peace. Something seems lacking. God does not talk to him face to face because the mind, where God and man meet, is darkened by the murky thought that other men are sinners. Our first work in our demonstration is to contact God. Therefore, we must forgive all men their transgressions. Through this forgiveness, we cleanse our minds so that the Father can forgive us our own transgressions. That is deep. Our forgiving all men includes ourselves. You must also forgive yourself. Let the finger of denial erase every sin or falling short that you have charged up against yourself. Pay your debt by saying to that part of yourself which you think has fallen short, thou art made whole, sin no more, lest a worse thing befall thee. Then loose him and let him go. Treat sin as a mental transgression instead of considering it as a moral deflection. Deny in thought all tendencies to the error way and hold yourself firmly to the Christ Spirit, which is your divine self. Part company forever with accusing conscience. those who have resolved to sin no more have nothing in common with guilt. Let's talk about forgiveness for a second. He may not be done, but I think it's like that's a big ask, in some of that, because it's not saying, forgive the little things. It's saying forgive all men.
Right. But I think we forgiveness is something that I wrestle with, honestly. And it took a long time for me to really sink my teeth into this truth that forgiveness is not absolving someone for a transgression. Forgiveness is saying, I'm not going to allow my thoughts to continue punishing myself about this situation, right? Forgiveness releases these energetic ties to some event and allows me to be pure of heart again, right? We so often think that forgiveness is like, oh, it's okay, and we say, oh, I accept your apology, right? I forgive you. But forgiveness is for us. And forgiving you has and I don't know if you've ever had this experience, Wally, but sometimes I've forgiven people and then they continue with the same behaviors, right? Or and I have to change the way I'm thinking. Like, if I want to be in this relationship, then I either have to set clear boundaries on what is acceptable for me or not, or I have to forgive them and then maybe move on with my life.
Yeah, and we say, I bless you and release you, and that's basically just slightly different words are used right here in this book that I just read. So forgiveness doesn't mean you have to keep enduring something that you didn't like, and it doesn't mean that you have to say that something that was maybe really not okay is suddenly okay. It's exactly what you said. It's and what they're saying here is like your thoughts are things. And so your thoughts are taking up your mental space. So, is there infinite space in your mental? Yes. But do we use that mental space by focusing in on a certain area? Yes. So it's like, where do you want to do it? It's kind of like I'll forgive them, but I'll never forget. Okay, well then it sounds like you're not actually going to forgive them because you're going to hold on to this and you're going to think about it all the time. And you can say, look, what I learned from this is John Doe and I are not on the same life path right now. So I'm going to bless and release that and allow John Doe to go on about their path. And I'm going to go on about my path. And we're not going to keep walking together, and not out of hate, but out of true blessing and releasing. Most people, and certainly, as I learned this in my early days of New Thought and for quite a while, that bless and release was more like a, I bless and release, and it's like, no, because you've put so much energy into the negative part of that, you ain't let go of nothing. And you may not see that person ever again, or it may be a long time, but you never let them go. So you might as well have kept hanging out with them, because mentally it's the same thing if you don't truly release them with the blessing.
Right.
I remember in the 90s when it took me quite a few more years to actually read the book Conversations with God myself. But I remember when one of my roommates in New York read it and was telling me, this concept in this book about, Hitler, God loves Hitler too. And, at that time when I had not been introduced to New Thought even, I was like, what the hell? And, and look, Hitler, there's plenty of other examples in history of people who have done really horrible things to other humans or other life in general. And so at no point are we ever saying, yes, it's okay to do those harmful things to other people. And yet we can't say I'm one with God and God rests in all life. Well, but not that one. No, in all. Some people just got so caught up in the ego view of it. So that's something to bless and release them on. That's part of the forgiveness of, like, I see that they're caught up in the physical world view of this right now, and they're, I don't see them experiencing the God within them, but I also know that it's not even my place to try and make them do that.
Right.
And so I'm just going to accept that that is true for them, and I look forward to talking to them again when they find that, and whatever. So I mean, I think it's important to kind of have that conversation about, like, doing the forgiveness work where there was an argument and a misunderstanding with somebody that really loved, and that you come back together and say, please forgive me. I don't ever want to think about that again. I'm sorry that I was involved in that, even though I swear that I don't say the word sorry after my I am, and I just did. Please forgive me. Like, that's great and important. But it's also important to do that other part of the forgiveness work where maybe you still think that there was a harmful thing that happened that you would never give a thumbs up to, and yet that's where the blessing and releasing forgiveness comes into play, I think.
Right. And you triggered a thought, with, if someone does come to us and asks for our forgiveness, right? That's a conversation you get to engage in. But if you are holding on to something that needs to be forgiven, if any one of us is holding on to something that needs to be forgiven, if you don't have a conversation with somebody about that situation, forgiveness is a personal thing, and you don't have to tell them. In fact, I highly advise not walking up to someone that you haven't seen in a couple of months, or in 2 years or 5 years, and being like, oh, and by the way, I forgive you, because that's not going to go well. Anyway.
Forgive me for what? I didn't do nothing to you. I wasn't wrong when I did. Then you start the whole thing back up again.
Yes. And then you're like, oh, so, unless you really like that kind of conflict,
Plenty of people do.
Well, some people do, but I truly believe that as we expand in consciousness and we really, really get to know that I am of our own personhood, that I am that is showing up at the point of us, we don't really like those conflicts.
Look, and I earned my living for quite a few years working in television soap operas. And so what I say on that is, let us allow you to live vicariously on TV, through TV, on the drama, and then just have peace in your real life. Let the TV entertain you with drama, but don't do don't try and live it for real.
Exactly.
All right, now I got to remember where I stopped reading. Oh, I know, I see it. It's the first full paragraph on page 120.
Mm-hmm.
Starts with a quote. Shall I be in debt as long as I hold debts against others? We find this to be the law of mind. A thought of debt will produce debt. So long as you believe in debt, you will go into debt and accumulate the burdens that follow that thought. Whoever has not forgiven all men their debts is likely to fall into debt himself. Does this mean that you should give receipted bills to all those who owe you? No, that would be erasing the thought of debt from your mind. First, deny in mind that any man or woman owes you anything. If necessary, go over your list of names separately and sincerely forgive the thought of debt which you have been attaching to each person's name. More bills may be collected in this way than in any other, for many of these people will pay what they owe when you send them this forgiving thought. Debt is a contradiction of the universal equilibrium, and there is no such thing as lack equilibrium in all the universe. Therefore, in spirit and in truth, there is no debt. However, men hold on to a thought of debt, and this thought is responsible for a great deal of sorrow and hardship. The true disciple realizes his supplies in the consciousness of omnipresent, universally possessed abundance. spirit substance is impartial and owed in common, and no thought of debt can enter into it. And I just quick stopping again to say, if somebody comes and asks you to borrow money, we'll just stick to money for now, and you're not in a place that you feel you really have it to give, that, if you're in the place of like, all right, I can give this to you, but you're saying to me that you can pay me back in a week or in a month, and I'm going to need it then, don't, just say no. Just say no. If you can't afford to give it away, if you can't afford for it not to be returned to you, then don't let it go. And that's as much of a mental thing as the spiritual, the spiritual part of it, and just the material goods of it. If you got some bills coming up and there's this set amount of money, I'm not encouraging you to look into the lack and limitation, but I'm also saying, don't set yourself up for an unnecessary upset. It's okay to, and you don't have to then start trying to throw in excuses to pull yourself into debt you don't currently have. You can just say, I can't help you with that. That can't may be a stronger emotional thought process than the physical, do I currently have the money sitting in the bank or in my, secret hiding spot? Yes. But do I also already have that money spoken for in my mind of what I need to spend it on? Then I have to bless them in another way. Don't like, I find so often these principles get used, especially when people are learning it and working it out, start getting used as a way to be financially irresponsible. Oh, well, let me just pay this out, because I believe in a God that gives me everything I want, while they're thinking, I sure hope that money comes in, because I'm going to be screwed if it doesn't. It's like don't set yourself up for failure. Be honest with where you are so that you can get to where you want to go. I didn't mean to go off on that much of a tangent that soon. What do you have to say?
Well, no, I agree completely, because we always want to give from our abundance, right? And if we're not feeling very abundant because, well, I've already earmarked this money that I have received to pay this other debt that I have, and instead we give it to a friend or another loved one, right? And then they don't pay it back in a timely fashion as they've maybe said they would. And then suddenly we start holding the consciousness of, I can't pay my bills.
Right. And now we're adding the negative emotion to, and that person has done me wrong. And then
right. And that compounds, and then suddenly, you're on the debt train, right? Even though you were trying to, oh, well, I've got this and I'll give it. Well, just because, a positive cash flow is one thing, but having the spirit and awareness of your abundance and the ability to share that abundance must be done responsibly. Right.
I got a lesson that in my young teenage years, by something my dad did that has helped me in adulthood on more than one occasion. Someone came to ask to borrow money from him, but it was somebody that he already knew was not in a habit of paying, but they weren't really asking to borrow. They were asking to be given. They
Right.
used to use the word borrow. And our neighbor where I grew up was a banker, one of our neighbors. His name was Steve. And my dad said to this woman, he said, my parents were in dry cleaning. And my dad said to her, he said, I made a deal with Steve when I moved here. I told him if he wouldn't clean clothes, I wouldn't loan money. And and the aside from just being cute, the lesson in that is stay in your lane. It's like, no, I'm not that, like, so go find, and I'm okay being who I am, right? So if I can't afford to give it to you, and I don't mean just by the number of the numbers in my checkbook. I mean, if I can't mentally afford to give it to you, then I absolutely can't afford to loan it to you.
Right. Absolutely. That your story queued up many years ago. I worked in a mission. We had 5 social service programs, and one of them was a church. It was not a faith that I was affiliated with, but I was working there as a communications officer. And at the beginning of the month, the receptionist told me that we would start getting phone calls because people were looking for assistance with their bills. And people would, and she knew who was going to call which month because she had like kept track of it over so many years that people had put on a rotation, that every 3 months you can call these people to get assistance with different bills. And at one point it came up that some people in my community here wanted to have a benevolence fund. If there are people that are experiencing a hardship, we want them to be able to reach out to feel supported. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And we cannot hold them in their poverty consciousness. So if we want to have a benevolence fund, then let's have a benevolence fund that's repayable so that we don't have to keep all the time going out to our community and saying, hey, here's a family that has a financial need. But if so, occasionally somebody's car is going to break down. Somebody's going to need a little bit of help. But we created this fund so that it becomes a regenerating experience, so that it is loaned. But we don't want to just give away money because we also don't want to hold people in a poverty consciousness.
Right. That's, yeah, wonderful add that you did to what was already there, so that you're really helping people learn to fish as well as eat the fish.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because I mean, since you pulled up a pair, a Bible story, that there are thoughts that parts of feeding the fish and the loaves of bread were because suddenly everyone had their supply and they shared it, right? But they shared from their abundance,
right?
So, and when we all share from our abundance, all our needs are met.
That is it. All right, top of page 121. Debts exist in the mind, and in the mind is the proper place to begin liquidating them. These thoughts, entities, must be abolished in mind before their outer manifestations will pass away and stay away. The world can never be free from the bondage of financial obligations until men erase from their minds the thoughts of mine and thine that generates debts and interest. Analyze the thought of debt and you will see that it involves a thought of lack. Debt is a thought of lack with absence at both ends. The creditor thinks he lacks what is owed him, and the debtor thinks he lacks what is necessary to pay it. Else he would discharge the obligation rather than continue it. There is error at both ends of the proposition and nothing in the middle. This being true, it should be easy to dissolve the whole thought that anyone owes us or that we owe anyone anything. We should fill our mind with thoughts of all sufficiency, and where there is no lack, there can be no debts. Thus, we find that the way to pay our debts is by filling our minds with the substance of ideas that are the direct opposite of the thoughts of lack that caused the debts. Ideas of abundance will more quickly and surely bring what is yours to you than any thoughts you can hold about debtors discharging their obligations to you. See substance everywhere and affirm it, not only from yourself, but for everyone else. Especially affirm abundance for those whom you have held in the thought of owing you. Thus, you will help them pay their debts more easily than if you merely erased their names from your book of accounts receivable. Help pay the other fellow's debts by forgiving him his debts and declaring for him the abundance that is his already in spirit. The idea of abundance will also bring its fruits into your own life. Let the law of plenty work itself out in you and in your affairs. This is the way the Father forgives your debts, not by canceling them on his books, but by erasing them from his mind. He remembers them no more against you when you deny their reality. The Father is everywhere present spirit in which all that appears has its origin. God loves God's love sees you always well, happy, and abundantly provided for. But God's wisdom demands that order and right relation exist in your mind before it may become manifest in your affairs as abundance. His love would give you your every desire, but his wisdom ordains that you forgive your debtors before your debts are forgiven. To remedy any state of limited finances or ill health that has been brought about by worry, one must begin by eliminating the worry that is the original cause. One must free one's mind from the burden of debt before the debt can be paid. Many people have found that the statement, I owe no man anything but love, has helped them greatly to counteract this thought of debt. As they used the words, their minds were opened to an inflow of divine love, and they faithfully cooperated with the divine law of forgiveness in thought, word, and deed. They built up a strong consciousness of the healing and enriching powers of God's love, that they could live and work peacefully and profitably with their associates. Thus, renewed constantly in their health, in faith, and in integrity, they were able to meet every obligation that came to them. The statement, I owe no man anything but love, does not mean that we can disclaim owing our creditors money or try to evade the payment of obligation we have incurred. The thing denied is the burdensome thought of debt or of lack. The work of paying debts is an inner work having nothing to do with the debts already owed, but with the wrong thoughts that produce them. When one holds to the right ideas, burdensome debts will not be contracted. Debts are produced by thoughts of lack, impatient desire, and covetousness. When these thoughts are overcome, debts are overcome, forgiven, and paid in full, and we are free from them for all time. I'm going to stop for there for a second. I'm going to hand over reading to you, but I do want to take the time for us and for everyone watching. I invite you to type this in, because when you type or when you handwrite, you use a different part of your brain than when you speak. But then for everybody to say together, let's say it several times. I owe no man anything but love. I owe no man anything but love. I owe no man anything but love. And taking on the responsibility of the truth of that in saying, I owe everybody love. That's the intent. It's not to, as it was saying here, this isn't to say, well, yeah, I owed $100 to you, but Charles Fillmore said, I owe no man anything but love, so I don't owe you nothing anymore. That is not what it's saying. It's saying if you pay with love first, everything else will find its way into divine order.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to pick up something else from the end of that last chapter. Debts are produced by thoughts of lack, impatient desire, and covetousness.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime we find ourselves in a mental space of acknowledging our debt, then we are concentrating on lack, that we are impatient, or that we are coveting what someone else has. We have an opportunity for forgiveness, right?
Yeah.
We have an opportunity right away to turn the cheek, to see from a different perspective, forgive that, and lift up, look up, climb the mountain, go up in consciousness, and know that there is no lack. There is no lack. You already have available to you everything we could possibly desire in
Right,
spirit.
because there is an infinite flow of everything that we need. So, covetousness is not to see that your neighbor's got something that you like. It's fine to see it and be like, oh, that is awesome. I want one of those too. It's covetousness is to say, oh, that is awesome. I want that. They need to give it to me. No, no, that one's theirs. Use that as inspiration of creating your own. This isn't a limited pie. This is an infinite flow.
You said pie.
I
Talking
love
about
pie.
I love pie. Okay. Well, I'm going to jump in now on 123, the second indent. Your thoughts should at all times be worthy of your highest self, your fellow man, and God. The thoughts that most frequently work ill to you and your associates are thoughts of criticism and condemnation. Free your mind of them by holding the thought, there is now no condemnation in Christ Jesus. There is now no condemnation in Christ Jesus. Fill your mind with thoughts of divine love, justice, peace, and forgiveness. This will pay your debts of love, which are the only debts you really owe. Then see how quickly and easily and naturally all your outer debts will be paid, and all inharmonies of mind, body, and affairs smoothed out at the same time. Nothing will so quickly enrich your mind and free it from every thought of lack as the realization of divine love. Divine love will quickly and perfectly free you from the burden of debt and heal you of your physical infirmities, often caused by depression, worry, and financial fear. Love will bring your own to you, adjust all misunderstandings, and make your life and affairs healthy, happy, harmonious, and free as they should be. Love indeed is the fulfillment of the law. The way is now open for you to pay your debts. Surrender them to God along with all your doubts and fears. Follow the light that is flooding into your mind. God's power, love, and wisdom are here, for his kingdom is within you. Give him full dominion in your life and affairs. Give him your business, your family affairs, your finances, and let him pay your debts. He is even now doing it, for it is his righteous desire to free you from every burden. And he is leading you out of the burden of debt, whether of owing or being owed. Meet every insidious thought, such as, I can't, I don't know how, I can't see it that way, with the declaration, Jehovah is my shepherd, I shall not want. Love that. That's from the 23rd Psalm, for those of you that are wondering, how do I know that? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You shall not want the wisdom, the courage to do, or the substance to do with when you have once fully realized the scope of the vast truth that almightiness is leading you into green pastures beside still waters. In the kingdom of truth and reality, let's start that over because my lips got blah, blah. In the kingdom of truth and reality, ideas are the coin of the realm. You can use the new ideas that divine wisdom is now quickening in your mind and start this very moment to pay your debts. Begin by thanking God for your freedom from the debt-burdened thought. This is an important step in breaking the shackles of debt. The funds to pay all your bills may not suddenly appear in a lump sum, but as you watch and work and pray, holding yourself in the consciousness of God's leadership and his abundance, you will notice your funds beginning to grow. Here a little, here a little, there a little, and increasing more and more rapidly as your faith increases and your anxious thoughts are stilled. For with the increase will come added good judgment and wisdom in the management of your affairs. Debt is soon vanquished when wisdom and good judgment are in control. Do not yield to the temptation of easy payment plans. Any payment that drains your pay envelope before you receive it is not an easy payment. Do not allow false pride to tempt you to put on $1,000 front in $100 salary. There may be times when you are tempted to miss paying a bill in order to indulge a desire for something. This easily leads one into the habit of putting off paying, which fastens the incubus of debt on people before they realize it. It is the innocent appearing forerunner of the debt habit and debt thought that may rob you of peace, contentment, freedom, integrity, and prosperity for years to come. The divine mind within you is much stronger than the desire mind of the body. Turn to it in a time like this and affirm, Jehovah is my shepherd. I shall not want this thing until it comes to me in divine order. Bless your creditors with the thought of abundance as you begin to accumulate the wherewithal to pay off your obligations. Keep the faith they had in you by including them in your prayer for increase. Begin to free yourself at once by doing all that is possible with the means you have. And as you proceed in this spirit, the way will open for you to do more. For though the avenues of spirit, more means will come to you, and every obligation will be met. If you are a creditor, be careful of the kind of thoughts you hold over your debtor. Avoid the thought that he is unwilling to pay you or that he is unable to pay you. One thought holds him in his dishonesty, and the other holds him subject to lack, and either of them tends to close the door to the possibility of his paying you soon. Think well and speak well of all those who owe you. If you talk about them to others, avoid calling them names that you would not apply to yourself. Cultivate a genuine feeling of love for them and respect their integrity in spite of appearances. Declare abundant supply for them and thus help them to prosper. Pray and work for their good as well as for your own, for yours is inseparable from theirs. You owe your debtor quite as much as he owes you, and yours is a debt of love. Pay your debt to him, and he will pay his to you. This rule of action never fails. Far-seeing Christians look forward to an early resumption of the economic system inaugurated by the early followers of Jesus. They had all things in common, and no man lacked anything. But before we can have a truly Christian community founded on a spiritual basis, we must be educated into a right way of thinking about finances. If we should all get together and divide all our possessions, it would be a short time until those who have the prevailing financial ideas would manipulate our finances, and plethora on one hand and lack on the other would again be established. The world cannot be free from the bondage of debt and interest until men start to work in their minds to erase those things from consciousness. If the United States forgave the nations of Europe, all their debts would be wiped the slate clean. The law would not necessarily be fulfilled, for there would probably be a thought that they still owed us and that we had made a sacrifice in canceling their obligations. I need to pause for a second. Bless me. Excuse me.
The viewers did not see, because I think when you hit mute, it jumped to me, except I was just looking at a picture.
You were just looking at me sneeze in the camera. That's perfect.
Well,
we didn't need that recorded.
Bless you, Reverend Todd.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, Reverend Wally. All right. We should not feel breathe. We should not feel very friendly about it and would not truly forgive them. And in that case, the error thought would be carried on. We must first forgive the error thought that they owe us money and that we would be losing money by canceling the debts. The man who is forced to forgive a debt does not forgive it. Above all, we should fill our mind with the consciousness of that divine abundance, which is so manifest everywhere in the world today. There is as much substance as there ever was, but its free flow has been interfered with through selfishness. We must rid our mind of the selfish acquisitiveness. We must
Yep.
rid our mind of the selfish acquisitiveness that is so dominant in the race thought, and in that way do our part in the great work of freeing the world from avarice. It is the duty of every Christian metaphysician to help in the solution of this problem by affirming that the universal spirit of supply is now becoming manifest as a distributing energy the world over, that all stored up, hoarded, vicarious thoughts are being dissolved, that all people have things in common, that no one anywhere lacks anything, and that the divine law of distribution of infinite supply that Jesus demonstrated is now being made manifest throughout the world. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. There is a legitimate commerce that is carried on by means of what is called credit. Credit is a convenience to be used by those who appreciate its value and are careful not to abuse it. For to do so would be to ruin it. However, many persons are not equipped to use the credit system to advantage and are likely to abuse it. In the first place, few individuals are familiar with the intricacies of sound credit systems and often assume obligations without being certain of their ability to meet them, especially should some unforeseen complications arise. Frequently, an individual loses all that he invests and finds himself involved in a burden of debt in addition. Such things are not in divine order and are largely responsible for retarding prosperity. I'm going to pause and do a little storytelling. My experience of prosperity and understanding the teachings about abundance that are available to us got hijacked because when I was when I start a freshman in college, you can, if anybody else can remember back that far, you walk onto campus and there are tables set up everywhere. And what do? They are shoving credit card applications at you as soon as you walk on campus. I'm glad that I do not have children that I have to explain how predatory those practices can be. And now I realize, even as I say that, I need to, if I'm not going to call myself predatory, I can't call them predatory, right? Because Charles just told us that. But the truth is we need to make sure that we know how to use the credit if we're going to have the credit for people of all ages. Because I tied myself up in debt for another 20 years past graduation because I made some really stupid choices.
Yeah, I didn't do it in college. I did it in my 30s. I did it after I became a New Thought student. And because that's what I've been thinking about as we were reading this stuff too. And I was talking to somebody recently about Edwin Gaines and her book, the 4 Laws of Prosperity, I think is what it's called.
Right.
And she's a perfect example in her story because she was in a place of like not 2 nickels to rub together sort of thing. And somebody had asked her to go on a trip and she decided to use her prayer work and claim she was going to go on that trip. But the difference in what she does and what she writes about and what I was doing, see, I had my credit card and I was like, I lived to a certain standard. I wasn't living luxuriously, but I wasn't going to live poor either, right? So sometimes that meant just paying bills on the credit card and claiming that the money would come later. But that's irresponsible. That's using New Thought lessons to be financially irresponsible. What Edwene writes about in her book is that she started doing all her prayer work and claiming that the money was available, not would be sometime. She's claiming it right now. The money is available for me to go on this trip, da 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 da. But then the money came in and she went on the trip, right? But she didn't just pull out a credit card. I gather from reading her story, a credit card wasn't even an option for her at the time, which ended up being a help maybe. But she didn't just give herself debt and say it'll get paid for sometime because I've prayed on it. No, what you prayed on was I accept debt, because that's what you've currently done. She prayed on it and the money showed up, and then she went on the trip. Had the money not shown up, she would not have gone on that trip. But she didn't also leave any room for the money not to show up. That's the key. But what I did in my early days of New Thought, confession time, is I just pulled out the credit card, and then I'd get applications for new credit cards, and I'd take that. And some months, to keep good credit, I'd transfer a balance from this card to that card, and that was a payment for the month. So I never went with any, and I kept good credit, right? So I did that for as long as I could pull it off. So I built up a lot of debt. I think it was somewhere around $44,000 worth of credit card debt. And then I finally was like, no, now my goal is I got to pay off debt. Well, now how do you really focus and work on, when you're living check to check, paying off that kind of debt and not be thinking about lack and limitation? That became, I set myself up for really having to learn that lesson a really difficult way. I got there, I think. Do I still sometimes have debt? Yes. But do I use a credit card now? All the time. But I now use it in a way that I'm earning points and paying, and I'm consciously aware of what I've earmarked money for, so that I'm being responsible with it. But yeah, there's this thing about like, oh, I'm praying on it. Well, pray some more, because you're now I don't think God's answer to your prayer is debt. So it's like, let's figure this out. And sometimes from the human experience of it, that's hard. It's difficult. It's challenging.
I've got to step away for a second. We're at the bottom of 128 at the last paragraph. I'm going to let you start reading and I'll be right back.
All right. Sounds good. So that's the key to that is claim it, but mean it. And don't accept that debt is the answer in and of itself, right? So let's see what else Charles has to say. No one should assume an obligation unless he is prepared to meet it promptly and willingly when it comes due. One who knows God as his unfailing resource can be assured of his supply when it is needed. Then why should he plunge into debt when he is confident of his daily supply without debt? There are no creditors or debtors in God's kingdom. If you are in that kingdom, you need no longer be burdened with the thought of debt, either as debtor or creditor. Under divine law, there is no reaching out for things that are beyond one's present means. There is an ever increasing richness of consciousness coming from the certain knowledge that God is infinite and unfailing supply. Outer things conform to the inner pattern, and riches are attracted to the one who lives close to the unselfish heart of God. His environment is made beautiful by the glory of the presence, and there is satisfying and lasting prosperity in his affairs. There is but one way to be free from debt. That is the desire to be free, followed by the realization that debt has no legitimate place in God's kingdom, and that you are determined to erase it entirely from your mind. As you work towards your freedom, you will find it helpful to have daily periods of meditation and prayer. Do not concentrate on debt or spoil your prayers by constantly thinking of debts. Think of that which you want to demonstrate, not that from which you seek freedom. I'm going to say that one again. Think of that which you want to demonstrate, not that which you want which you seek freedom. When you pray, thank the Father, thank the universe, thank God, thank whatever word works for you. Thank peanut butter, is that it, Todd?
Yes.
Thank that powerful, giving, loving, creative presence when you pray for his provision and plenty and his love and wisdom, for his infinite abundance and your privilege to enjoy it. Here are a few prosperity prayers that may help you establish in the truth of plenty and erase the error thought of debt that are offered as suggestions for forming your own prayers, but may be used as given with excellent results. All right, here are those prayers. I am no longer anxious about finances. Thou art my all sufficiency in all things. The spirit of honesty, promptness, efficiency, and order is now expressed in me and in all that I do. I am free from all limitations of mortal thought about quantities and values. The superabundance of riches of the Christ mind are now mine, and I am prospered in all ways. And Todd, you were just bringing up the 23rd Psalm. I'll let you read this last bit.
Okay. This is the 23rd Psalm, a treatment to free the mind of the debt idea. Jehovah is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and loving kindness shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Jehovah forever. And so it is.
All that we need is available, right? And the biggest thing holding us up from truly receiving it and living in the flow of it is our own thoughts of lack and limitation and they done me wrong, and or stupid me, I made this mistake. Like we never really delved into that as much when I read early on in the forgiveness work of how important it is to forgive yourself. In fact, I would go as far as saying you can't really get into the in-depth, true forgiving other people until you're willing to release yourself from negative thoughts and feelings and actions and accept, well, that was then, but now if I'm seeing it, I can release myself. I've learned a lesson. I'm going to move forward with that.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's the lesson.
So, friends, thanks for joining us. If we said anything that piqued your interest, something you had conflict with, anything, something that you went absolutely yes, and you want to share a story, that's why we've got the chat. Please share with us. Let us know what questions, what you're thinking, how you're enjoying this, and we'll be back next week with lesson 9.
We love it.
My thoughts are working faster than my mouth can today.
All right. Love and blessings, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Reverend Wally.
Thank you, Todd.